shadow soul, Sorilea said. The white-haired wise one circled around the prisoner, looking thoughtfully at Semirog. Of course, Catsway had not expected fear from one such as Sorilea. The Aiel woman was a rugged creature, like a statue that had weathered storm after storm, patient before the winds. Among the Aiel, this wise one was a particular specimen of strength. She had arrived at the manor house only recently, coming with those who had brought Althor a report from Bandar Eben. Catswain had anticipated finding many things among the Aiel who followed Randall. Fierce warriors, ways, honor and loyalty, inexperience with subtlety and politics. She had been right. One thing she had certainly not expected to find, however, was an equal. Certainly not in a wise one who could barely channel. And yet, oddly, that was how she regarded the leathery-faced Aiel woman. Not that she trusted Sorilea. The wise one had her own goals, and they might not completely coincide with Catswain's. However, she did find Sorilea capable, and there were blessed few people in the world these days who deserved that word. Semirog flinched suddenly, and Sorilea cocked her head. The Forsaken was not floating this time. She stood upright, wearing the stiff brown dress, her short dark hair tangled from lack of brushing. She still projected superiority and control, just as Catswain herself would have in a similar situation. "What are these weaves?" Sorilea asked, gesturing. The weaves in question were the source of Semirog's occasional flinching. "A personal trick of mine," Catswain said, undoing the weaves and remaking them to show how they were done. "They ring a sound in your subject's ears every few minutes and flash a light in their eyes, keeping them from sleep. You hope to make her so fatigued that she will talk," Sorilea said, studying the Forsaken again. Semirog was warded to keep her from hearing them, of course. Despite 2 days without decent sleep, the woman wore a serene expression, eyes open but blocked by glowing lights. She had likely mastered some kind of mental trick to help her stave off exhaustion. "I doubt it will break her," Catswain admitted. "Faugh! It barely even makes her flinch." She, Sorilea, and Bear, an aged wise one with no channeling ability, were the only ones in the room. The Aes Sedai maintaining Semirog's shield sat in their places outside. Sorilea nodded. "One of the shadow-souled will not be manipulated so easily. Still, you are wise to try, considering your limitations." "We could speak to the Karakarn," Bear said. "Convince him to turn this one over to us for a time. A few days of delicate Aiel questioning, and she would speak whatever you wish." Catswain smiled non-committally, as if she would let another handle the questioning. This woman's secrets were too valuable to risk, even in the hands of allies. "Well, you are welcome to it," he said. "But I doubt Althor will listen. You know how the fool boy can be when it comes to hurting women." Bear sighed. It was odd to think of this grandmotherly lady engaging in delicate Aiel questioning. "Yes," she said. "You are right, I suspect. Rand Althor is twice as stubborn as any clan chief I've known, and twice as arrogant, too. To presume that women cannot bear pain as well as men." Catswain snorted at that. "To be honest, I considered having this one strung up and whipped. Althor's prohibitions be blackened. But I don't think it would work. Faugh. We'll need to find something other than pain to break this one." Sorilea was still regarding Semirog. "I would speak with her." Catswain made a motion, dismissing the weaves that kept Semirog from hearing, seeing, or speaking. The woman blinked, just once, to clear her vision, then turned to Sorilea and Bear. "Ah," she said. "Aiel, you were such good servants once. Tell me, how strongly does it bite, knowing how you betrayed your oaths? Your ancestors would cry for punishment if they knew how many deaths lay at the hands of their descendants." Soralia gave no reaction. Cadsuane knew some tidbits of what Althor had revealed about the Aiel, things that had been said at second or third hand. Althor claimed that the Aiel had once followed the way of the leaf, sworn not to do harm before betraying their oaths. Cadsuane had been interested to learn of these rumors, and she was more interested to hear Semirhage corroborating them. She seems so much more human than I had anticipated, Soralia said to Bear. Her expressions, her tone, her accent, while strange, are easy to understand. I had not expected that. Semirhage's eyes narrowed for just a moment at that comment. Odd. That was a stronger reaction than virtually any of the punishments had produced. The flashes of light and sound prompted only slight, involuntary twitches. This comment of Soralia's, however, seemed to affect Semirhage on an emotional level. Would the Wise Ones actually succeed so easily, where Cadsuane had long failed? I think this is what we need to remember, Bear said. A woman is just a woman, no matter how old, no matter what secrets she remembers. Flesh can be cut, blood can be spilled, bones can be broken. In truth, I feel almost disappointed, Cadsuane Eladrin, Soralia said, shaking a white-haired head. This monster has very small fangs. Semirhage reacted no further. Her control was back, her face serene, her eyes imperious. I have heard some little of you oathless Aiel, and your interpretations of honor. I will very much enjoy investigating how much pain and suffering it will require before members of your clans will shame themselves. Tell me, how far do you think I would have to push before one of you would kill a blacksmith and dine on his flesh? She knew more than some little, if she understood the near sacred nature of blacksmiths among the Aiel. Soralia stiffened at the comment, but let it go. She re-wove the ward against listening, then paused and placed the globes of light in front of Semirhage's eyes as well. Yes, she was weak in the power, but she was a very quick learner. Is it wise to keep her like this? Soralia asked, her tone implying that of any other she would have made a demand. For Cadsuane she softened her words, and it almost brought a smile to Cadsuane's lips. They were like two aged hawks, Soralia and she, accustomed to roosting and reigning, now forced to nest in neighboring trees. Deference did not come easily to either one of them. If I were to choose, Soralia continued, I think that I would have her throat slit and her corpse laid out on the dust to dry. Keeping her alive is like keeping a snapwood blacklance as a pet. Faugh, Cadsuane said, grimacing. You're right about the danger, but killing her now would be worse. Althor cannot or will not give me an accurate count of the number of Forsaken he has slain, but he implies that at least half of them still live. They'll be there to fight at the last battle, and each weave we learn from Semirhage is one fewer than they can use to surprise us. Soralia did not seem convinced, but she pressed the issue no further. And the item? She asked. May I see it? Cadsuane almost snapped a no. But Soralia had taught Cadsuane traveling, an incredibly powerful tool. That had been an offering, a hand extended. Cadsuane needed to work with these women, Soralia most of all. Althor was a bigger project than one woman could handle. Come with me, Cadsuane said, leaving the wooden room. The Wise Ones followed. Outside, Cadsuane instructed the sisters, Daigyan and Serene, to make certain that Semirhage was kept awake, eyes open. It was unlikely to work, but it was the best strategy Cadsuane had at the moment. Though she did also have Semirhage's momentary look, that hint of anger displayed at Soralia's comment. When you could control a person's anger, you could control their other emotions as well. That was why she had focused so hard on teaching Althor to rein in his temper. Control and anger. What was it that Soralia had said to get the reaction? that Semirog seemed disappointingly human. It was as if Soralia had come expecting one of the Forsaken to be as twisted as a Murdral or Drugkar. And why not? The Forsaken had been figures of legend for 3,000 years, looming shadows of darkness and mystery. It could be disappointing to discover that they were in many ways the most human of the Dark One's followers. Petty, destructive, and argumentative. At least, that was how Althor claimed they acted. He was so strangely familiar with them. Semirog saw herself as more than human, though. That poise, that control of her surroundings was a source of strength for her. Cadsuane shook her head. Too many problems and far too little time. The wooden hallway itself was another reminder of the Althor boy's foolishness. Cadsuane could still smell smoke, strong enough to be unpleasant. The gaping hole in the front of the manor, draped only with a cloth, let in chill air during the spring nights. They should have moved, but he claimed that he would not be chased away. Althor seemed almost eager for the last battle, or perhaps just resigned. To get there, he felt he had to force his way through the petty squabbles of people like a midnight traveler pushing through banks of snow to arrive at the inn. The problem was Althor wasn't ready for the last battle. Cadsuane could feel it in the way he spoke, the way he acted, the way he regarded the world with that dark, nearly dazed expression. If the man he was now faced the Dark One, the fate of the world, he feared for all people. Cadsuane and the two wise ones reached her chamber in the manor, a sturdy, undamaged room with a good view of the trampled green and camp out front. She made few demands in the way of decoration: a stout bed, a lockable trunk, a mirror and stand. She was too old and impatient to bother with anything else. The trunk was a decoy. She kept some gold and other relatively worthless items in it. Her most precious possessions she either wore, in the form of her ter'angreal ornaments, or kept locked in a dingy-looking document box that sat on her mirror stand. Of worn oak, the stain uneven, the box had enough dings and dents to look used, but wasn't so shabby as to be out of place with her other things. As Soralia closed the door behind the three of them, Cadsuane disarmed the box's traps. It was strange to her how few Aes Sedai learned to innovate with the One Power. They memorized time-tested and traditional weaves, but gave barely a thought for what else they could do. True, experimenting with the One Power could be disastrous, but many simple extrapolations could be made without danger. Her weave for this box was one such. Until recently, she'd used a standard weave of fire, spirit, and air to destroy any documents in the box if an intruder opened it. Effective, if a bit unimaginative. Her new weave was much more versatile. It didn't destroy the items in the box. Cadsuane wasn't certain if they could be destroyed. Instead, the weaves, inverted to be invisible, sprang out in twisting threads of air and captured anyone in the room when the box was opened. Then another weave set out a large sound, imitating 100 trumpets, playing while lights flashed in the air to give the alarm. The weaves would also go off if anyone opened the box, moved it, or barely touched it with the most delicate thread of the One Power. Cadsuane flipped up the lid. The extreme precaution was necessary, for inside this box were two items that presented very serious danger. Soralia walked over, looking in at the contents. One was a figurine of a wise, bearded man holding aloft a sphere, about a foot tall. The other was a black metallic collar and two bracelets, an Adon made for a man. With this ter'angreal, a woman could turn a man who could channel into her slave, controlling his ability to touch the One Power, perhaps controlling him completely. They had not tested the collar. Althor had forbidden it. Soralia hissed quietly, ignoring the statue and focusing on the bracelets and collar. This thing is evil. Yes, Cadsuane said. Rarely would she have called a simple object evil, but this one was. Nynaeve Almira claimed some familiarity with this thing. Though I have not been able to press out of the girl how she knows these things, she claims to know that there was only one male Adon, and that she'd arranged for its disposal in the ocean. She also admits, however, that she didn't see it destroyed personally. It may have been used as a pattern by the Shonchan. This is unsettling to see, Sorilea said. If one of the Shadow Souled, or even one of the Shonchan, captured him with this, might protect us all, Bear whispered. And the people who have these are the same people with whom Althor wishes to make peace. Sorilea shook her head. Creation of these abominations alone should warrant a blood feud. I heard that there were others like it. What of those? Stored elsewhere, Cadsuane said, shutting the lid, along with the female Adon we took. Some acquaintances of mine, Aes Sedai who have retired from the world, are testing them and trying to discover their weakness. They also had Kalandor. Cadsuane was loath to let it out of her sight, but she felt that the sword still held secrets that could be teased out. I kept this one here because I intend to find a way to test it on a man, she said. That would be the best way to discover its weaknesses. Althor won't allow any of his Ashaman to be leashed by it, however. Not for the shortest time. This made Bear uncomfortable. A little like testing a spear's strength by stabbing it into someone, she muttered. Sorilea, however, nodded in agreement. She understood. One of the first things Cadsuane had done after capturing those female Adon was put one on and practice ways to escape from it. She'd done so under carefully controlled circumstances, of course, with women she trusted to help her escape. They'd eventually have to do that. Cadsuane had been able to discover no way out on her own. But if your enemy was planning to do something to you, you had to discover how to counter it, even if that meant leashing yourself. Althor couldn't see this. When she asked, he simply muttered about that bloody box and being beaten. We have to do something about that man, Sorilea said, meeting Cadsuane's eyes. He has grown worse since we last met. He has, Cadsuane said. He's surprisingly accomplished at ignoring my training. Then let us discuss, Sorilea said, pulling over a stool. A plan must be arranged. For the good of all. For the good of all, Cadsuane agreed. Althor himself, most of all.
Chapter 15. A Place to Begin. Rand woke on the floor of a hallway. He sat up, listening to the distant sound of water. The stream outside the manor house? No, that was wrong. The walls and floor here were stone, not wood. No candles or lamps hung from the stonework, and yet there was light, ambient in the air. He stood, then straightened his red coat, feeling strangely unafraid. He recognized this place from somewhere, distant in his memory. How had he come here? The recent past was clouded and seemed to slip from him like fading trails of mist. No, he thought firmly. His memories obeyed, snapping back into place before the strength of his determination. He had been in the Damani Manor House, awaiting a report from Rourke about the capture of the first few members of the Merchant Council. Men had been reading each castle, a biography, in the deep green chair of the room they shared. Rand had been exhausted, as he often was lately. He'd gone to lie down. He was asleep then. Was this the world of dreams? Though he had visited it on occasion, he knew very few specifics. Egwene and the Aiel Dreamwalkers spoke of it only guardedly. This place felt different from the dream world, and oddly familiar. He looked down the hallway. It was so long that it vanished into shadows, walls broken by doors at intervals, the wood dry and cracked. Yes, he thought, seizing at a memory. I have been here before, but not in a long time. He chose one of the doors at random. He knew that it wouldn't matter which one he picked, and pushed it open. There was a room beyond of modest size. The far side was a series of gray stone arches. Beyond them, a little courtyard and a sky of burning red clouds. The clouds grew and sprang from one another like bubbles in boiling water. They were the clouds of an impending storm, unnatural though they were. He looked more closely and saw that each new cloud formed the shape of a tormented face, the mouth open in a silent scream. The cloud could swell, expanding upon itself, face distorting, jaw working, cheeks twisting, eyes bulging. Then it would split, other faces swelling out of its surface, yelling and seething. It was transfixing and horrifying at the same time. There was no ground beyond the courtyard, just that terrible sky. Rand did not want to look toward the left side of the room. The fireplace was there. The stones that formed floor, hearth, and columns were warped, as if they had been melted by an extreme heat. At the edges of his vision, they seemed to shift and change. The angles and proportions of the room were wrong, just as they had been when he'd come here long ago. Something was different this time, however. Something about the colors. Many of the stones were black, as if they'd been burned, and cracks laced them. Distant red light glowed from within, as if they had cores of molten lava. There had once been a table here, hadn't there? Polished and of fine wood, its ordinary lines a discomforting contrast to the distorted angles of the stones. The table was gone. The two chairs sat before the fireplace, high-backed and facing the flames, obscuring whomever might be sitting in them. Rand forced himself to walk forward, his boots clicking on stones that burned. He felt no heat, either from them or the fire. His breath caught and his heart pounded as he approached those chairs. He feared what he would find. He rounded them. A man sat in the chair on the left. Tall and youthful, he had a square face and ancient blue eyes that reflected the hearth fire, turning his irises almost purple. The other chair was empty. Rand walked to it and sat down, calming his heart and watching the dancing flames. He had seen this man before in visions, not unlike the ones that appeared when he thought of Matt or Perrin. The colors did not appear on this thought of his friends. That was odd, but somehow not unexpected. The visions he'd seen of the man in the other chair were different from the ones involving Perrin and Matt. They were more visceral somehow, more real. At times, during those visions, Rand had felt almost as if he could reach out and touch this man. He'd been afraid of what would happen if he did. He had met the man only once, at Shadar Logoth. The stranger had saved Rand's life, and Rand had often wondered who he had been. Now in this place, Rand finally knew. "You are dead," Rand whispered. "I killed you." The man didn't look from the fire as he laughed. It was a rough, low-throated laugh that held little true mirth. Once Rand had known this man only as Baalzamon, a name for the Dark One, and had foolishly thought that in killing him, he had defeated the Shadow for good. "I watched you die," Rand said. "I stabbed you through the chest with Kalandor, Isha." "That is not my name," the man interrupted, still watching the flames. "I am known as Moradin now." "The name is irrelevant," Rand said angrily. "You are dead, and this is just a dream." "Just a dream," Moradin said, chuckling. "Yes." The man was clad in a black coat and trousers, the darkness relieved only by red embroidery on the sleeves. Moradin finally looked at him. Flames from the fire cast bright red and orange light across his angular face and unblinking eyes. "Why do you always whine that way? Just a dream. Do you not know that many dreams are more truthful than the waking world?" "You are dead," Rand repeated stubbornly. "So are you. I watched you die, you know, lashing out in a tempest, creating an entire mountain to mark your cairn. So arrogant." Lews Therin had, upon discovering that he'd killed all that he loved, drawn upon the One Power and destroyed himself, creating Dragonmount in the process. Mention of this event always brought on howls of grief and anger in Rand's mind. But this time there was silence. Moradin turned back to watch the heatless flames. To the side, in the stones of the fireplace, Rand saw movement, flickering bits of shadow, just barely visible through the cracks in the stones. The red-hot heat shone behind, like rock turned molten, and these shadows moved, frantic. Just faintly, Rand could hear scratching. Rats, he realized. There were rats behind the stones, being consumed by the terrible heat trapped on the other side. Their claws scratched, pushing through the cracks as they tried to escape their burning. Some of those tiny hands seemed almost human. Just a dream, Rand told himself forcefully. Just a dream. But he knew the truth of what Moradin had said. Rand's enemy still lived. Light. How many of the others had returned as well? Anger made him grip the armrest of the chair. Perhaps he should have been terrified, but he had stopped running from this creature and his master long ago. Rand had no room left for fear. In fact, it should be Moradin who feared. For the last time they had met, Rand had killed him. How? Rand demanded. Long ago, I promised you that the Great Lord could restore your lost love. Do you not think that he can easily recover one who serves him? Another name for the Dark One was Lord of the Grave. Yes, it was true, even if Rand wished he could deny it. Why should he be surprised to see his enemies return when the Dark One could restore the dead to life? We are all reborn, Moradin continued, spun back into the pattern time and time again. Death is no barrier to my master, save for those who have known Balefire. They are beyond his grasp. It is a wonder we can remember them. Some of the others really were dead. Balefire was the key. But how had Moradin gotten into Rand's dreams? Rand set wards each night. He glanced at Moradin, noticing something odd about the man's eyes. Small black flecks floated about in the whites, crossing back and forth like bits of ash blown on a leisurely wind. The Great Lord can grant you sanity, you know, Moradin said. Your last gift of sanity brought me no comfort, Rand said, surprising himself with the words. That had been Lews Therin's memory, not his own. Yet Lews Therin was gone from his mind. Oddly, Rand felt more stable somehow, here in this place where all else appeared fluid. The pieces of him fit together better. Not perfectly, of course, but better than they had in recent memory. Moradin snorted softly, but said nothing. Rand turned back to the flames, watching them twist and flicker. They formed shapes, like the clouds, but these were headless bodies, skeletal, backs arching in pain, writhing for a moment in fire, spasming before flashing into nothing. Rand watched that fire for a time, thinking. One might have thought that they were two old friends enjoying the warmth of a winter hearth, except that the flames gave no heat, and Rand would someday kill this man again, or die at his hands. Moradin tapped his fingers on the chair. Why have you come here? Come here, Rand thought with shock. Hadn't Moradin brought him? I feel so tired, Moradin continued, closing his eyes. Is that you, or is it me? I could throttle Semirhage for what she did. Rand frowned. Was Moradin mad? Ishamael had certainly seemed crazy at the end. It is not time for us to fight, Moradin said, waving a hand at Rand. Go. Leave me in peace. I do not know what would happen to us if we killed one another. The great Lord will have you soon enough. His victory is assured. He has failed before and will fail again, Rand said. I will defeat him. Morden laughed again, the same heartless laugh as before. Perhaps you will, he said. But do you think that matters? Consider it. The wheel turns time and time again. Over and over the ages turn and men fight the great Lord. But someday he will win, and when he does, the wheel will stop. That is why his victory is assured. I think it will be this age, but if not, then in another. When you are victorious, it only leads to another battle. When he is victorious, all things will end. Can you not see that there is no hope for you? Is that what made you turn to his side? Rand asked. You were always so full of thoughts, Elam. Your logic destroyed you, didn't it? There is no path to victory, Moradin said. The only path is to follow the great Lord and rule for a time before all things end. The others are fools. They look for grand rewards in the eternities. But there will be no eternities. Only the now. The last days. He laughed again, and this time there was joy in it. True pleasure. Rand stood. Morden eyed him warily, but did not get up. There is a way to win, Moradin, Rand said. I mean to kill him. Slay the Dark One. Let the wheel turn without his constant taint. Moradin gave no reaction. He was still staring at the flames. We are connected, Moradin finally said. That is how you came here, I suspect. Though I do not understand our bond myself. I doubt you can understand the magnitude of the stupidity in your statement. Rand felt a flash of anger, but fought it down. He would not be goaded. We shall see. He reached for the one power. It was distant, far away. Rand seized it and felt himself yanked away as if on a line of sardine. The room vanished, and so did the one power, as Rand entered a deep blackness.
1 second.
Rand finally stopped thrashing in his sleep, and Min held her breath, hoping that he wouldn't start again. She sat, legs tucked underneath her, wrapped in a blanket as she read in her chair at the corner of the room. A small lamp flickered and danced on the short table beside her, illuminating her stack of musty books. Falling shale, marks and remarks, monuments past. Histories, most of them. Rand sighed softly, but did not move. Min released her breath and settled back into her chair, finger marking her place in a copy of Palateos' Ponderings. With the shutters closed for the night, she could still hear the wind sough in the pines. The room smelled faintly of smoke from the strange fire. Avienda's quick thinking had made a potential disaster into a mere inconvenience. Not that she was being rewarded for it. The wise ones continued to work her as hard as a merchant's last mule. Min hadn't been able to get close enough to her to have a conversation, despite the fact that they'd been in the camp together for some time now. She didn't know how to think of the other woman. They had become a little more comfortable with one another that evening, sharing usquai. But one day did not friends make, and she was definitely uncomfortable about sharing. Min glanced again at Rand, lying on his back, eyes closed, breath coming evenly now. His left arm lay across his blankets, the stump exposed. She didn't know how he managed to sleep with those wounds in his side. As soon as she thought of them, she could feel the pain. It was all part of the rolled-up ball of Rand's emotions in the back of her mind. She had learned to ignore the pain. She'd had to. For him, it would be much, much stronger. How he could stand it, she didn't know. She wasn't Aes Sedai, thank the light, but somehow she had bonded him. It was amazing. She could tell where he was, tell if he was distraught. She could mostly keep his emotions from overwhelming her, except when they were passionate. But what woman didn't want to be overwhelmed during those moments? It was a particularly exhilarating experience with the bond, which let her feel both her own desire and the raging tempest of fire that was Rand's desire for her. The thought made her blush, and she pulled open Ponderings to distract herself. Rand needed his sleep, and she was going to let him have it. Besides, she needed to study, although she was confronted by conclusions that she didn't like. These books had belonged to Herod Fell, the kindly old scholar who had joined Rand's school in Cairhien. Min smiled, remembering Fell's distracted way of talking and his confused, yet somehow brilliant, discoveries. Herod Fell was dead now, murdered, torn apart by Shadow Spawn. He'd discovered something in these books, something he'd intended to tell Rand. Something about the last battle and the seals on the Dark One's prison. Fell had been killed just before he could pass on the information. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps the books had nothing to do with his death. But perhaps they did. Min was determined to find the answers, for Rand and for Herod himself. She put down Ponderings and picked up Thoughts Among the Ruins, a work from over 1,000 years ago. She'd marked a place with a small slip of paper, the very same now worn note that Herod had sent to Rand shortly before the murder. Min turned it over in her fingers, reading it again. Belief and order give strength. Have to clear rubble before you can build. Will explain when see you next. Do not bring girl. Too pretty. She figured, from reading among his books, that she could trace his thoughts. Rand had wanted information on how to seal the Dark One's prison. Could Fell have discovered what she thought he had? She shook her head. What was she doing trying to solve a scholarly mystery? But who else was there? One of the Brown Ajah might be better suited, but could they be trusted? Even those who had made their oaths to him might decide that it was in Rand's best interests to keep secrets from him. Rand himself was far too busy, and he was too impatient for books lately anyway. That left Min. She was beginning to piece together some of what he would have to do, but there was more, so much more that was still unknown. She felt she was getting close, but it worried her to reveal what she'd discovered to Rand. How would he respond? She sighed, scanning the book. She'd never thought that she, of all people, would become a fool for some man. Yet here she was, following him wherever he went, putting his needs before her own. That didn't mean she was his pet, regardless what some of the people in camp said. She followed Rand because she loved him, and she could feel, literally, that he returned her love. Despite the harshness that was invading him bit by bit, despite the anger and the bleakness of his life, he loved her. And so she did what she could to help him. If she could help solve this one puzzle, the puzzle of sealing the Dark One's prison, she could achieve something not just for Rand, but for the world itself. What did it matter if soldiers in the camp didn't know what her value was? It was probably better if everyone assumed her to be dismissible. Any assassin who came to kill Rand should think that he could ignore Min. The would-be killer would soon discover the knives hidden in Min's sleeves. She wasn't as good with them as Tom Marilyn was, but she knew more than enough to kill. Rand turned in his sleep, but settled down again. She loved him. She hadn't chosen to do so, but her heart, or the pattern, or the creator, or whatever was in charge of these things, had made the decision for her. And now she wouldn't change her feelings if she could. If it meant danger, if it meant suffering the looks of men in the camp, if it meant sharing him with others. Rand stirred again. This time he groaned and opened his eyes, sitting up. He raised his hand to his head, somehow managing to look more weary now than he had when he'd gone to sleep. He wore only his small clothes, and his chest was bare. He sat like that for a long moment, then stood up, walking to the shuttered window. Min pushed her book closed. And what do you think you're doing, sheep herder? You barely slept for a couple of hours. He opened the shutters and the window, exposing the dark night beyond. A stray curl of wind made her lamp flame shiver. Rand? Min asked. She could barely hear his voice when he replied. He's inside my head. He was gone during the dream, but he's back now. She resisted sinking down in her chair. Liked she hated hearing about Rand's madness. She'd hoped that when he healed Saidin, he would be free of the taint's insanities. He, she asked, forcing her voice to be steady. The voice of Lews Therin? He turned, clouded night sky outside the window framing his face, the lamp's uneven illumination leaving his features mostly in shadows. Rand, she said, setting her book aside and joining him beside the window. You have to talk to someone. You can't keep it all inside. I have to be strong. She tugged on his arm, turning him toward her. Keeping me away means you're strong. I'm not. Yes, you are. There are things going on in there, behind those Aiel eyes of yours. Rand, do you think I will stop loving you because of what you hear? You'll be frightened. Oh, she said, folding her arms. So I'm a fragile flower, am I? He opened his mouth, struggling for words, in the way he once had, back when he'd been nothing more than a sheep herder on an adventure. Min, I know you're strong. You know I do. Then trust me to be strong enough to bear what is inside you, she said. We can't just pretend nothing has happened. She forced herself onward. The taint left marks on you. I know it did. But if you can't share it with me, who can you share it with?
Hey, Ozart, how you
He ran
doing?
his hand through his hair, then turned away.
Hope you're doing well.
Burn
I'm
it
just
all,
doing a
Min.
little
If my
repair
enemies
work
discover
on
my weaknesses, they will
that pair of
exploit
shorts
them.
I have.
I feel
I
blind.
had a
I'm
pretty
running in the dark
sizable
on an
hole on it,
unfamiliar
so
path.
I
don't
gotta
know
fix
if there are
it.
breaks in the road or if the whole cursed thing ends in a cliff. She laid a hand on his arm as he
Pretty
turned,
much.
stopping him. Tell me. You'll think I'm mad. She snorted. I already think you're a wool-headed fool. Can it be much worse than that?
Give me 1 second and we'll do a dab
and
real
some of the
quick.
tension left his face. He sat down on the edge of the bed, sighing softly. But it was progress. Semirog was
Why
right.
is my phone
Rand
not showing chat?
I hear things, a voice. The voice of Lews Therin, the dragon. He speaks to me and responds to the world around me.
But yeah,
Sometimes he tries to seize Saidin from me,
I like them because they're
and sometimes he succeeds.
pretty lightweight for,
He's wild, man. Insane.
especially for this
But the things
area.
he can do with the one power
Yeah.
are amazing.
I had a hole, so I'm
He
pretty
stared
much
off
patching
into
it up.
distance. Min,
A lot of my clothes that some, at least
he let the voice
some
in
of
his
them
head
that have
wield the
patches
one
on them,
power,
at least
What did
most
that
of them
mean?
are because
but he let the mad
I put
heartless
patches on a
Rand
lot of
take
shit
control.
and
He shook his head.
it's usually repairing them.
Semirog claims that this is just insanity, tricks of my mind. But Lews Therin knows things that I don't. Things about history, about the one power. You had a viewing of me that
My
showed
email?
two people merging into one. That means
Let's
that
see,
Lews
let me
Therin
send
and I are
that.
distinct. Two people, Min. He's real. She walked over and sat next to him.
There it is.
Rand,
Let's do a dab real quick.
or you're him, spun out into the pattern again. Those memories and things you can do, they're remnants from who you were before. No, Rand said. Min, he's insane and I'm not. Besides, he failed. I won't. I won't do it, Min. I won't hurt those I love as he did. And when I defeat the Dark One, I won't leave him able to return a short time later and terrorize us again. 3,000 years, a short time later? She put her arms around him. Does it matter? She asked. If there is another
The
person,
last of it.
or if those are just memories from before, the information is useful. Yes, Rand said, seeming distant again. But I'm afraid to use the one power. When I do, I risk letting him take control. He can't be trusted. He didn't mean to kill her, but that doesn't change the fact that he did. Wait. Ilyena. Was this how it happened to all of them? Each one assuming that they were really sane? And that it was the other person inside of them who did horrible things? It's done now, Rand, she said, holding him close. Whatever this voice is, it won't grow any worse. Saidin is cleansed. Rand didn't respond, but he did relax. She closed her eyes, enjoying the feeling of his warmth beside her, particularly since he'd left the window open. Ishamael lives, Rand said. She snapped her eyes open. What? Just when she was beginning to feel comfortable. I visited him in the world of dreams, Rand said. And before you ask, no, it wasn't just a nightmare, and it wasn't madness. It was real, and I can't explain how I know. You will just have to trust me. Ishamael, she whispered. You killed him. Yes, Rand said. In the Stone of Tyr. He has returned, bearing a new face and a new name, but it is him. We should have realized it would happen. The Dark One won't abandon such useful tools without a fight. He can reach beyond the grave. And how can we win? If everyone we kill just comes back again, Balefire, Rand said. It will kill them for good. Catswain said, I don't care what Catswain said, he snarled. She is my advisor, and she gives advice, only advice. I am the Dragon Reborn, and I will decide how we fight. He stopped, taking a deep breath. Anyway, it doesn't matter if the Forsaken return. It doesn't matter who or what the Dark One sends at us. In the end, I will destroy him, if possible. If not, then I will at least seal him away so tightly that the world can forget him. He glanced down at her. For that, I need the voice, Min. Lews Therin knows things, or I know things. Whichever it is, the knowledge is there.
Oh, yeah.
In a way, the Dark One's own
Now I gotta
genes
figure
will
out what to
destroy
put
him,
that
for
on.
it is what gave me access to Lews Therin.
Brightness down.
Min glanced at her books. Herod's little slip of paper still peeked from the depths of Thoughts Among the Ruins.
That's badass,
Rand,
Ozark.
she said. You have to destroy the seals to the Dark One's prison. He looked at her, frowning. I'm sure of it, she said. I've been reading Herod's books all this time, and I believe that's what he meant by clearing away the rubble. In order to rebuild the Dark One's prison, you will first need to open it. Clear away the patch made on the bore. She had expected him to be incredulous. Shockingly, he just nodded. Yes, he said. Yes, that's right. I doubt that many will wish to hear it. If those seals are broken, there is no way to tell what will happen. If I fail to contain him... The prophecies didn't say Rand would win, only that he would fight. Min shivered again. Blasted window. You'll defeat him, he sighed. Faith in a madman. Faith in you, sheep herder. Suddenly, she spun around.
Oh, shit. Hell yeah.
She ignored them most of the time, unless they were new. But now she picked them
Hell
up.
yeah.
Fireflies consumed in darkness. 3 women before a fire. Flashes of light, darkness, shadow. Signs of death. Crowns, injuries, pain, and hope. A tempest around Randall Thor. A physical storm. We still don't know what to do, he said. The seals are brittle enough that I could break them in my hands, but what then? How do I stop him? Does it say anything of that in your books? It's hard to tell, she admitted. The clues, if that's what they are vague. I will keep looking. I promise. I'll find answers for you. He nodded, and she was surprised to feel his trust. That was a frighteningly rare...
Oh, 2 a.m. Damn. Yeah.
But he did seem softer than he
Hour ahead of me, huh?
Days. Still stone, but perhaps with some few cracks, willing to let her inside. She tightened her arms around him and closed her eyes again. A place to begin, but with so little time left, it would have to do. Carefully shielding her burning candle, Avienda lit the pole-mounted lantern. It flickered a light, the green around her. Slumbering soldiers snored in rows of tents. The evening was cold, the air crisp, and branches rattled in the distance. A lonely owl hooted, and Avienda was exhausted. She'd
I'll
crossed the
probably end
grounds
up
50
calling it
times,
the night
lighting
after
the
I
lantern,
get
blowing
this
it out,
done.
then jogging back across the green and lighting her candle at the manor before walking carefully, shielding the flame, to light the lantern again. Another month of these punishments and she'd probably go as mad as a wetlander. The wise ones would wake one morning and find her going for a swim, or carrying a half-full water skin, or even riding a horse for pleasure. She sighed, too exhausted to think any further, and turned toward the Aiel section of camp to find her.
Hell yeah, Ozark. Definitely
Someone was
appreciate it,
standing
brother.
behind her.
No rush,
She
bro.
started, hand going to her dagger,
You gotta get
but
done what you gotta
relaxed
get
as she
done.
recognized Amis. Of all the wise ones, only she, a former maiden, could have sneaked up on Avienda. The wise one stood with hands clasped before her, brown shawl and skirt flapping slightly in the wind. Avienda's skin prickled at the particularly chilly gust. Amis's silver hair seemed almost ghostly in the evening light. A pine needle passing on the breeze had gotten lodged in it. You approach your punishments with such dedication, child, Amis said. Avienda looked down. Pointing out her activities was to shame her. Was she running out of time? Had the wise ones finally decided to give up on her? Please, wise one, I only do as duty demands. Yes, you do, Amis said. She reached up, running her hand through her hair, and found the pine needle, then let it drop to the dead grass. And also, you do not. Sometimes, Avienda, we are so concerned with the things we have done that we do not stop to consider the things we have done. Avienda was glad for the darkness,
All that I'm
which
doing.
hid her shameful blush. In the distance, a soldier rang the evening bell to chime the hour. The soft metal
It's pretty
ringing
much
with 11
to-
melancholy peals. How did she respond to Amis's comments? There didn't seem to be any proper
some,
response.
old
was saved by
pajama
a flash of
bottoms
light
I had.
beyond the camp. It was faint, but in the darkness the flicker was easy to notice. What? The wise one asked, noticing Avienda's gaze and turning to follow it. Light, Avienda said.
Yeah, but
From
I'm
the
almost
traveling
done with it. I just need to go
Amis frowned. Then the two of them
across
moved
this
toward the
way now.
grounds. Soon they encountered Dahmer Flynn, Davram Bashir, a small guard of Saldeans and Aiel walking into the camp. What did one think of a creature such as Flynn? The taint had been cleansed, but this man, and many of the others, had come asking to learn before that had happened. Avienda herself would have sooner embraced Sight Blinder himself as done that, but they had proven to be powerful weapons. Amis and Avienda moved to the side as the small party hurried toward the manor house, lit only by the distant flickering torches and the cloud-covered sky above. Though most of the force sent to meet the Shonchan
Hell yeah.
made up of Bashir's
And I pretty much just
soldiers,
have
there
a
were several
cardboard
maidens in the
behind
group.
it.
Amis locked eyes with one of them, an older woman named Korana. She hung back, and though it was
Hey,
difficult to tell in the
D-Man,
darkness,
how
she
you
looked
doing, bro?
concerned, perhaps angry. What news?
I'm just
Amis asked. The
repairing a pair of
invaders, these
shorts of mine.
Shonchan, Korana nearly
And this
spat
is
the word.
dental
They have
floss.
agreed to another meeting with the Kara Karn. Amis
Nice.
nodded.
Yeah, I started a
Korana,
new
however,
one
sniffed
too.
audibly, short
Well,
hair ruffling in
you've
the chill
seen it.
breeze. Speak, Amis said.
Wrong
The
phone.
Karakarn
Give me 1
suits too
second.
hard for peace, Korana replied. These Shonchan have given him reason to declare a blood feud, but he simpers and panders to them. I feel like a trained dog sent to lick the feet of a stranger. Amis glanced at Avienda. What do you say to this, Avienda?
I started this
My heart
one.
agrees with her words, wise one. But while the Karakarn is a fool in some things, he is not being one now. My mind agrees with him, and in this case, it is the mind I would follow. How can you say that? Korana snapped. She emphasized
I
you,
just,
as if to imply
oh,
that
I've been
Avienda,
spacing out
recently
about
maiden, should understand.
live streaming it.
Which is more important,
I need to
Korana?
actually
Avienda
quit
replied,
putting it
raising
off and
her
actually
chin.
do it.
The argument you have with another maiden? or the feud your clan has with its enemy? The clan comes first, of course, but what does that matter? The Shan deserve to be fought, Aviendha said, and you are right that it pains to ask them for peace. But you forget that we have a greater enemy. Sightblinder himself has a feud with all men, and our duty is larger than feuds between nations. Amis nodded. There will be time enough to show the Shan the weight of our spears at another date. Corona shook her head. Wise one, you sound like a wetlander. What care have we for their prophecies and stories? Grand Althor's duty as Kara
just
Khan
from
is much
how
greater
old
than
it
his
is,
duty to
and
the wetlanders.
it started off
He
as a
must
little
lead us
hole.
to glory.
Then the more and more it got
Amis
washed,
stared
the
harshly
bigger and
at the
bigger it
blonde
got.
maiden.
So
You speak like a
I
Shan.
ended up cutting all
Corona
the
locked her stare for a moment,
little
then wilted,
frilly
turning
things,
away.
like from the,
Pardon, wise
like
one,
all
she
frayed
finally
looking. I
said.
cut it all
I
up
have
and
toe.
squared
But you
it
should
up as
know
best
that
I
the
could.
Shan had Aiel in their camps. What? Aviendha
I
asked.
tend not to throw my stuff
They were
away until
leashed, Corona
I
said,
can't repair it
like
no
a
more.
tame Aes Sedai. They were being shown off like prizes for our arrival, I suspect.
Just like
I
my
recognized many Shido among
vest I
them.
wear all the time.
Amis hissed softly.
I'm finally gonna
Shido
have
or
to
not, Aiel being held
replace
as Shemai
it
was a
because
grave insult, and the Shan
it's
were taunting their captives.
this way it's starting to fall apart.
What do you say
Just
now?
how old it is.
Amis glanced at Aviendha. Aviendha gritted her teeth. The same, wise one, though I'd almost rather cut out my tongue than admit it. Amis nodded, looking back at Corona. Do not think that we will
So,
ignore this
The
insult,
patches
Corona.
that I have on there
Vengeance
are
will come.
a lot of them are
Once this
really
war
old
is done,
ones that I've had
the
for
Shan
years
will
and
feel the
years.
storm of our arrows
This
and the tips of
happens
our
to be
spears, but not until after.
I think my
We'll tell
third
the two clan
or
chiefs
fourth
what
vest
we
I've had. Just because I keep them
Corona
until they start
nodded.
falling
She
apart.
would meet her toe later in
And I
private
need to get a
with
new
Amis.
one already because, yeah, it's getting pretty
Dama
bad.
Flynn and the others had already reached the manor house. Would they wake Rand? He was sleeping now, though Aviendha had been forced to mute her bond in the middle of her night's punishment, lest she endure sensations that she'd rather have avoided. At least, she'd rather have avoided them secondhand. There will be dangerous words of this among the spears, Amis said thoughtfully. There will be calls to attack, demands that the Kara Khan give up his attempts to make peace. Will they stay with him when he refuses? Aviendha asked. Of course they will, Amis said. They're Aiel. She glanced at Aviendha. We haven't much time, child. Perhaps it is time to stop coddling you. I will think up better punishments for you starting tomorrow. Coddling me? Aviendha watched Amis stalk away. They couldn't possibly come up with anything more useless or demeaning. But she'd learned long ago not to underestimate Amis. With a sigh, Aviendha broke into a trot, heading back toward her tent. Chapter 16. In the White Tower. I'm curious to hear the novice speak. Tell me, Egwene Aldir, how would you have handled the situation? Egwene looked up from the bowl of shells, two-legged steel nutcracker in one hand, a bulbous walnut in the other. It was the first time any of the Aes Sedai present had addressed her. She had begun to think that attending the Three Whites would turn out to be another one.
This is pretty much my little
The afternoon's location was a small
sewing kit, I guess
inset
you'd call it.
balcony on the third level of the White Tower. Sitters could demand rooms with not only full windows, but balconies as well, something that was uncommon.
Some of my curved
though not
needles and
unheard
some
of for
patches.
regular sisters. This one was shaped like a small turret,
Some of the
with a
random
sturdy
type
stone
patches
wall
and then
running around the rim in a curve. A similar stone
sharpening
hanging from
stone.
the outcropping above. There was generous space
Because,
between the two, and the view was quite beautiful.
I tend not
Eastward
to
across
have
the
too many
rising hills that eventually
needles
climbed
that
to
often.
Kingslayer's dagger.
So I keep
The
them.
dagger itself
when they
might
go
have been
dull,
distinctly visible on a clear day.
I sharpen them up again.
A cool breeze blew across the balcony. and this high up it was fresh and unsullied
And
by the
then
stink of the city
dental
below.
floss.
A sinuous pair of stickle sharps, with their three-pronged leaves and clinging vines, grew on each
Other
side of the balcony,
patches.
their creeping tendrils covering the inside of the stonework
This cool
and
little
making it
thing.
look almost like a deep forest ruin. The plants were more ornamentation than Egwene would have expected in the quarters of a white, but Farana was reported to be a shade on the vain side. She probably liked it that her balcony was so distinctive, even if protocol required her to keep the vines pruned so as not to mar the gleaming profile of the tower itself. The three whites sat in wicker chairs at a low table. Egwene sat before them on a wicker stool, back to the open air, denied the view as she cracked nuts for the others. Any number of servants or kitchen workers could have done the work, but this was the sort of thing that sisters found to fill the time of novices, whom they thought might be lounging about too much. Egwene had thought that cracking the walnuts was just a pretense. After being ignored for the better part of an hour, she had begun to wonder, but all three were looking at her now. She shouldn't have doubted her instincts. Farana had the coppery skin of a Damani and a temperament to match. Odd for a white. She was short, with an apple-shaped face and dark, lustrous hair. Her auburn dress was filmy but decent, with a wide white
put
sash
more,
at the waist to
more
match her
thread on
shawl,
it.
which she was currently
Just a
wearing.
second, I gotta tie
The dress didn't lack for
this
embroidery,
part off
and the
real quick.
fabric did seem an indication, perhaps
Probably
intentional,
more
of her
better
Damani
way of doing
heritage.
it than the way I do it, but
The other two,
it's
Miyasi
the
and
way I've done it
Hassan,
for
both wore white, as if they feared
years,
that
so
dresses of any other colors were a betrayal of
my
their Aja.
stitching probably ain't the proper
That
way to
notion
do
was
shit
becoming more
anyway,
and
so
more common among all of the Aes
it
Sedai.
works for me, so
Tassan was a Tarabonner, with her dark hair in beaded braids. The beads were white and gold, and they framed a narrow face that looked as if it had been pinched at top and bottom and pulled. She always looked worried about something, though perhaps that was just the times. Light knew they all had a great deal to worry over. Miyasi was more calm, her head topped by iron-gray hair in a bun. Her Aes Sedai face betrayed none of the many years that she must have seen for her hair to silver so fully. She was tall and plump, and she preferred her walnuts shelled very particularly. No fragments or broken pieces of nut for her.
so y'all know I ain't lying when I say I use dental floss.
Egwene carefully pried one from the shell she had cracked, then handed it over. The small brown lump was wrinkled and ridged, like the brain of a tiny animal. "What was it you asked, Farana?" Egwene asked, cracking another walnut and discarding the shell in a pail at her feet. The white barely frowned at Egwene's improper response. They were all growing accustomed to the fact that this novice seldom acted her presumed station. "I asked," Farana said coolly, "what you would have done in the Amerlin's place. Consider this part of your instruction. You know that the dragon has been reborn, and you know that the tower must control him in order for the last battle to proceed. How would you handle him?" A curious question. It didn't sound much like instruction. But Farana's tone didn't make it sound like an offer to complain about Elida, either. There was too much contempt for Egwene in that voice. The other two whites remained quiet. Farana was a sitter, and they deferred to her. "She's heard how often I mention Elida's failure with Rand," Egwene thought, looking into Farana's steely black eyes. "So, a test, is it? This would have to be handled very carefully." Egwene reached for another walnut. "First, I would send a group of sisters to his home village." Farana raised an eyebrow. "To intimidate his family?" "Of course not," Egwene said. "To interrogate them. Who is this dragon reborn? Is he a man of temper? A man of passions? Or is he a calm man, careful and cautious? Was he the type to spend time alone in the fields? Or did he make quick friends of the other youths? Would you be more likely to find him in a tavern or a workshop?" "But you already know him," Tassan piped in. "I do," Egwene said, cracking the walnut. "But we were speaking of a hypothetical situation." best you remember that in the real world I know the Dragon Reborn personally, as nobody else in this tower does. Let us assume that you are you, Farana said, and that he is Rand al'Thor, your childhood friend. Very well. Tell me, Farana said, leaning forward, of the types of men you listed just before, which best fits this Rand al'Thor? Egwene hesitated. All of them, she said, dropping a fragmented walnut into a small bowl with others. Miyasi wouldn't touch it, but the other two weren't so picky. If I were me and the dragon were Rand, I'd know him to be a rational person for a man, if somewhat bullheaded at times. Well, most of the time. More importantly, I'd know him to be a good man at heart. And so my next step would be to send sisters to him to offer guidance. And if he rejected them? Farana asked. Then I'd send spies, Egwene said, and watch to see if he has changed from the man I once knew. And while you waited and spied, he would terrorize the countryside, wreaking havoc and bringing armies to his banner. And is that not what we want him to do? Egwene asked. I don't believe he could have been prevented from taking Kalandor, should we have wanted him to be. He has managed to restore order to Cairhien, unite Tyr and Ilion beneath one ruler, and presumably has gained the favor of Andor as well. Not to mention subjugating those Aiel, Miyasi said, reaching for a handful of nuts. Egwene caught her with a sharp gaze. Nobody subjugates the Aiel. Rand gained their respect. I was with him at the time. Miyasi froze, hand partway to the bowl of nut meats. She shook herself, breaking Egwene's gaze, grabbing the bowl and retreating back to her chair. A cool breeze blew across the balcony, rustling the vines, which Farana had complained were not greening this spring like they should. Egwene returned to shelling walnuts. It seems, Farana said, that you would simply let him sow chaos as he saw fit. Rand al'Thor is like a river, Egwene said, calm and placid when not agitated, but a furious and deadly current when squeezed too tightly. What Elaida did to him was the equivalent of trying to force the Manetha Rendrella through a canyon only 2 feet wide. Waiting to discover a man's temperament is not foolish, nor is it a sign of weakness. Acting without information is lunacy, and the White Tower deserved the tempest it riled up. Perhaps, Farana said. But you have still not told me how you would deal with the situation once your information was collected and the time for waiting had passed. Farana was known for her temper, but at the moment her voice held the coldness common among whites. It was the coldness of one who spoke without emotion, thinking about logic without tolerating outside influences. It was not the best way to approach problems. People were much more complex than a set of rules or numbers. There was a time for logic, true, but there was also a time for emotion. Rand was a problem she hadn't allowed herself to dwell on. She needed to deal with one problem at a time. But there was also much to be said for planning ahead. If she didn't consider how to deal with the Dragon Reborn, she'd eventually find herself in as bad a situation as Elaida. He had changed from the man she had known, and yet the seeds of personality within him must be the same. She'd seen his rage during their months traveling together into the Aiel Waste. That hadn't often come out during his childhood, but she could see now that it must have been lurking. It wasn't that he had suddenly developed a temper. It was simply that nothing in the 2 rivers had upset him. During the months she'd traveled with him, he'd seemed to harden with each step. He was under extraordinary pressures. How did one deal with such a man? She frankly had no idea. But this conversation wasn't about what to do with Rand. Not really. It was about Farana trying to determine what kind of woman Egwene was. Rand al'Thor sees himself as an emperor, Egwene said. But I suppose he is one now. He will react poorly if he thinks he is being pushed or shoved in any particular direction. If I were to deal with him, I would send a delegation to honor him. A lavish procession, Farana asked. No, Egwene said. But not a threadbare one either. A group of 3 Aes Sedai, led by a gray, accompanied by a green and a blue. He views the blue favorably because of past associations, and greens are often perceived as the opposites to reds, a subtle indication that we are willing to work with him rather than gentle him. A gray because it would be expected, but also because if a gray is sent, then it means negotiations, not armies, will follow. Good logic, Tassan said, nodding. Farana was not so easily convinced. Delegations like this one have failed in the past. I believe that Elida's own delegation was led by a gray. Yes, but Elida's delegation was fundamentally flawed, Egwene said. And why is that? Why, because it was sent by a red, of course, Egwene said, cracking a nut. I have trouble seeing the logic in raising a member of the Red Aja to Amarlin during the days of the Dragon Reborn. Doesn't that seem destined to create animosity between him and the Tower? One might say, Farana countered, that a red is needed during these troubled times, for the red are the most experienced at dealing with men who can channel. Dealing with is different from working with, Egwene said. The Dragon Reborn should not have been left to run free, but since when has the White Tower been in the business of kidnapping and forcing people to our will? Are we not known as the most subtle and careful of all people? Do we not pride ourselves on being able to make others do as they should, all the while letting them think it was their idea? When in the past have we locked
Give me
kings
one
in
second,
boxes
then I'll
and
show you
beaten
guys
them
the
for
finished product.
disobedience? Why now, of all the times under the light, have we forsaken our fine practice and become simple footpads instead? Farana selected a walnut. The other 2 whites were sharing an unsettled look. There is sense in what you say, the sitter finally admitted. Egwene set aside the nutcracker. Rand al'Thor is a good man in his heart, but he needs guidance. These days are when we should have been at our most subtle. He should have been led to trust Aes Sedai above all others, to rely on our counsel. He should have been shown the wisdom in listening. Instead, he has been shown that we will treat him like an unruly child. If he is one, he cannot be allowed to think we regard him in such a way. Because of our bungling, he has taken some Aes Sedai captive and has allowed still others to be bonded to those Ashaman of his. Farana sat up stiffly. Best not to mention that atrocity. What is this? Tassan said, shocked, hand raised to her breast. Some whites never seemed to pay attention to the world around them. Farana? Did you know of this? Farana didn't respond. I've heard this rumor, said stout Miyasi. If it is true, then something must be done. Yes, Egwene said. Unfortunately, we cannot focus on al'Thor right now. He is the greatest problem facing the world, pinch-faced Tassan said, leaning forward. We must deal with him first. No, Egwene said. There are other issues. Miyasi frowned. With the last battle impending, I can't see any other issues of importance. Egwene shook her head. In dealing with Rand now, we'd be like a farmer looking at his wagon and worrying that there aren't any goods in the bed for him to sell, but ignoring the fact that his axle is cracked. Fill the bed before it is time, and you'll just break the wagon and be worse off than when you started. And what exactly are you implying? Tassan demanded. Egwene looked back at Farana. I see, Farana said. You are referring to the division in the White Tower. Can a cracked stone be a good foundation for a building? Egwene asked. Can a frayed rope hold a panicky horse? How can we, in our current state, hope to manage the Dragon Reborn himself? Farana said, Why then do you continue to enforce the division by insisting that you are the Amarlin seat? You defy your own logic. And renouncing my claim on the Amarlin seat would mend the tower? Egwene asked. It would help. Egwene raised an eyebrow. Let us assume for a moment that by renouncing my claim, I could persuade the rebel faction to rejoin the White Tower and accept Elida's leadership. She raised the eyebrow further, indicating how likely she thought that was. Would the divisions be healed? You just said they would be, Tassan said, frowning. Oh? Egwene said. Would sisters stop scurrying through the hallways, frightened to be alone? Would groups of women from different Ajas stop regarding each other with hostility when they pass in the hallways? With all due respect, would we no longer feel the need to wear our shawls at all times to reinforce who we are and where our allegiance is? Verona glanced down briefly at her white-fringed shawl. Egwene leaned forward, continuing. Surely you, of all women in the White Tower, can see the importance of the Ajas working together. We need women with different skills and interests to gather into Ajas. But does it make sense for us to refuse to work together? The White has not caused this regrettable tension, Miyasi said with a little snort. The others, acting with such abundance of emotion, have created it. The present leadership has caused it, Egwene said. A leadership which teaches that it's all right to still fellow sisters in secret, to execute warders before their Aes Sedai are even brought to trial. That there's nothing wrong with removing a sister's shawl and reducing her to an accepted. That there's nothing wrong with disbanding an entire Aja. And what of acting without the Council of the Hall in something as dangerous as kidnapping and imprisoning the Dragon Reborn? Is it unexpected that the sisters would be so frightened and worried? Is it not all completely logical what has happened to us? The three Whites were quiet. I will not submit, Egwene said. Not while doing so leaves us fractured. I will continue to assert that Elida is not the Amyrlin. Her actions have proven it. You want to help battle the Dark One? Well, your first step is not to deal with the Dragon Reborn. Your first step should be to reach out to sisters of the other Ajas. Why us? Tassan said. The actions of others are not our responsibility. And are you not to blame at all? Egwene asked, letting a little of her anger seep through. Would none of her sisters accept a modicum of responsibility? You of the White should have seen where this road would lead. Yes, Swan and the Blue were not without their flaws, but you should have seen the flaw in pulling her down, then allowing Elida to disband the Blue. Besides, I believe that several members of your own Aja were integral to the act of setting up Elida as Amyrlin. Miyasi recoiled slightly. The Whites did not like to be reminded of Alviarin and her failure as Elida's keeper. Instead of turning against Elida for ousting the White, they seemed to have turned against their own member for the shame she had caused them. I still think that this is work for the Greys, Tassan said, but she sounded less convinced than she had just moments before. You should speak with them. I have, Egwene said. Her patience was beginning to fray. Some will not speak with me and continue to send me to penance. Others say these rifts are not their fault, but with some coaxing have agreed to do what they can. The Yellows have been very reasonable, and I think they're beginning to see the problems in the tower as a wound to be healed. I'm still working with several Brown sisters. They seem more fascinated by the problems than worried about them. I've sent several of them looking through the histories for examples of division, hoping they'll run across the story of Renala Merlin. The connection should be easy to make, and perhaps they will begin to see that our problems here can be solved. The Greens have, ironically, been the most stubborn. They can be very like Reds in many ways, which is infuriating, as they really should be willing to accept me as one who would have been among them. That only leaves the Blue, who have been banished, and the Reds. I doubt that sisters of that last Aja are going to be very receptive to my suggestions. Verona sat back, thoughtful, and Tassan sat with 3 forgotten walnuts in her hand, staring at Egwene. Miyasi scratched at her iron-gray hair, eyes wide with surprise. Had Egwene given away too much? Aes Sedai were remarkably like Randall IV. They did not like to know when they were being maneuvered. You are shocked, she said. What? Do you think I should simply sit, like most, and do nothing while the tower crumbles? This white dress has been forced upon me, and I do not accept what it represents, but I will use it. A woman in novice white is one of the few who can pass from one Aja quarter to another these days. Someone has to work to mend the tower, and I am the best choice. Besides, it is my duty. How very reasonable of you, Farana said, her ageless brow furrowed. Thank you, Egwene said. Were they worried that she'd overstepped her bounds? Angered that she'd been manipulating Aes Sedai? Coldly determined to see her punished yet again? Farana leaned forward. Let us say that we wished to work toward mending the tower. What path would you recommend? Egwene felt a surge of excitement. She'd had nothing but setbacks during the last few days. Idiot greens. They would feel foolish indeed once she was accepted as Amyrlin. Suana of the Yellow Aja will soon be inviting you three to share a meal with her, Egwene said. At least Suana would make the offer once Egwene prodded her. Accept and take your meal in a public place, perhaps in one of the tower gardens. Be seen enjoying one another's company. I will try to get a brown sister to invite you next. Let yourself be seen by the other sisters mixing among the Ajas. Simple enough, Miyasi said. Very little effort required, but excellent potential for gain. We shall see, Farana said. You may withdraw, Egwene. She didn't like being dismissed so, but there was no helping it. Still, the woman had shown Egwene respect by using her name. Egwene stood up and then, very carefully, nodded her head to Farana. Though Tassan and Miyasi gave no strong reactions, both pairs of eyes widened slightly. By now it was well known in the tower that Egwene never curtsied. And shockingly, Farana bowed her head just a degree, returning the gesture. Should you decide to choose the white, Egwene Alvear, the woman said, know that you will find a welcome here. Your logic this day was remarkable for one so young. Egwene hid a smile. Just 4 days back, Ben Alsad had all but offered Egwene a place in the brown, and Egwene was still surprised at how vigilantly Suana recommended the yellow to her. Almost they made her change her mind, but that was mostly her frustration with the green at the moment. Thank you, she said. But you must remember that the Amyrlin must represent all Ajas. Our discussion was enjoyable, however.
All right, everyone. I'm gonna call Into This Life for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.